Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. I'm just going to check and see if my audio is good, but we are going to continue our study on Matthew 1 and there we go. We're going to continue our study on Matthew 1 and we're going to start moving away from Matthew 1:1. And so we've been looking at Matthew 1:1 for quite a while, and I think you can see why. I could probably write a book about the issue of generation or genealogy there. There is quite a lot of these noise cancelling headphones, it makes you sound like you're underwater all of a sudden. It's very awkward, so I'm just making sure I can hear a little bit of outside noise. The whole issue of generation was quite interesting to look at. I think it is a huge error in the New King James and other TR Bibles to have genealogy in Matthew 1:1. But we're moving on from there. I was almost tempted to do something else this morning because I want this study to be in depth. But the problem is with doing something in depth, you have to have the time to study beforehand. And so I'm going to be doing, I've done some of that. Like sometimes I've sat down for, a few hours at a time and I'm going through, Matthew chapter 1, verse 2 and trying to tidy up my website. But it just takes so long just to put in all the information, go through all the TR editions, all the English editions. And by the time you've done that with Matthew chapter 1, verse 2, then you're like, well, I've got verse 3, verse 4, and you're almost tempted to skip the whole genealogy. But what we want to do, we want to continue on just reading through. We'll get done what we can do. If we do feel like something's lacking, we can always go back to certain verses and say, well, we've found this bit of information that might be of help. I think we exhausted Matthew 1:1. I don't think there's anything else we could say about that. Now, one of the things I want to do too, I'll just share my screen here, is I want to have a look at the 2016 edition that I've worked on. And so probably out of the whole entire Bible, the genealogical lists are where I did the least study because you're just looking at a bunch of names. And so usually modern versions and, the J. Green edition of the TR, the New King James, etc., they seem to have these type of names. And so at first, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I just thought, well, these are probably just updated. So you got, Zerubbabel or Zorobabel sort of thing. And sometimes we know that, say, in the Old King James, I'm calling it Old King James in comparison to the one that I've done. We know that, say, the word Noah sometimes is Noe. And it's like, okay, just have Noah there, Noah. And so when I was going through it, because the key principles that I had, people were complaining that the King James is unreadable. Mark Ward's not the first one to come along and say that. Pretty much everyone says it. So it's like, okay, well, I'll do an update. And so I spent years and years working on this and did an update. So that way, anyone who has an issue with the readability, they can just simply go to the 2016 edition. But Mark Ward doesn't want to even mention that this one exists because that sort of goes against his narrative, and he's trying to, and it's not copyrighted by Crossway or whatever, or Lexham or Faith Life or whatever he works for. So I've made it freely available. So anyone can print it, anyone can copy and paste it. Thanks, Docky. Good to see you as well. Thanks for the heads up about the audio. And so I'll just enlarge on this page a little bit. So you can see on my website, now I haven't done this with all the chapters. I've done it with a few. But you can see where I've compared the 1900 Pure Cambridge edition with the 2016 edition that I worked on. So, and one of the main reasons why I did a 2016 edition also was because I've been involved in Bible translation. Now, when you're talking to someone, say, like my friend in Cambodia, to, use terminology like, a lot of Matthew 1 is quite okay, but you do get to places, or say like here, a public example, like public, it's like, well, it's spelt different. Even just to correct some of the spelling, or I shouldn't say correct, I should say just update some of the spelling. I think some of that naturally would have happened if Westcott and Hort hadn't deceived the English-speaking world by saying that they're going to do an update and snuck in this never-seen-before Greek text. I think naturally the King James that someone would have said, hey, let's just do an update and not like the New King James where they're trying to get you to go to the United Bible Society text, or they're trying to get you to go to the majority text, or they actually do depart from the TR, and they depart a lot from just the King James readings many times because of their own bizarre conspiracy theories about certain words that they think shouldn't be in there. But so what I did, I thought, well, I'm not tainted by that sort of rubbish. I'll do an edition. And one of the main reasons was because of doing translations. And so most people, like even people in the academy who say that they can read Greek and Hebrew, most of them are lying. And most of them can't read Greek and Hebrew. When they say they read Greek and Hebrew, that means that, like Bart Ehrman said, he said most of the people in the academy can't read Greek and Hebrew. It just means that they're good at looking at dictionaries. And so most, knowing that type of thing, I was like, well, most people are actually just translating from English anyway, or actually updating Bibles. So what we did is we got older Bibles and we updated them according to what is written. And so when I did the Cambodian one, it was very hard for me not to go to the New King James, because that was sort of like the closest one that I could go to that was in some places understandable and comprehensible to someone who is learning English as a second language. So obviously my translator there, he's native Cambodian, speaks Khmer. He's got a very good grasp on English. When I was preaching over there, that's why I chose him, because I knew firsthand that he was a good translator. And he knew some of the issues already before I even mentioned TR issues or anything like that, or which Bible or whatever. He was already saying that there's issues with the modern Bible. So I was like, wow, this guy's already got discernment about that issue. So he's finished the New and Old Testament. And so what we did is we basically followed the New King James format, but then in places I was saying, look at this word, because I made a page very similar to this, but in PDF, with the King James and the New King James underneath. Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit of a sniffle there. And so he could see where there were differences and go, okay, I'll look that one word up in that sentence. So most of it's the same, but we're looking up, privily, that means privately, okay. And sometimes in the New King James, there's a huge change. So I would point that out and write things. And so that's why I found so many errors in New King James. And that prompted me to do this project, this type of thing. And so now when I'm working through this material in Urdu, doing the Urdu Bible, I can do it without the New King James. I can just do it with my one, because I've already cut out all those issues that the New King James had, because I just kept finding, I know people say it is a faithful TR edition and all the rest of it. I just kept finding biases. I kept finding Alexandrian type definitions, they like to call it. So anyway, as I'm going through this study, I'm double checking what I've done. And so probably the place where I really need to double check is in the genealogies. to make sure that every name is accurate. Now, some of them are just exactly the same. So what I'll do is I'll read through to from chapter 1, verse 2 to 6. Now, the reason I've chosen that is because I think there's only really one main textual issue, which has to do with David, and I think maybe Zara is mentioned in Codex Sinaiticus as a different spelling. But apart from that, there's not really that much difference between all the editions. So I thought, well, and that's part of the end of the first, 14 names. And so when we're going through this, we'll go through that, we'll count them all, and then the next session we'll go through, I think it's from Solomon till the carrying away into Babylon, and then to the carrying away into Babylon, and then from carrying away into Babylon unto Christ. So we'll do those in 3 sections, because when we start getting to verse 7, there's a few issues with Asa, in verse 10 with Amon, and also in verse 8 and 9, Ozias is a TR issue with Scrivener and the way it's pronounced. And so, that way you sort of know where we're going with this and why I chose to go from verse 2 down to verse 6. So, and when you read verse 17, it says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. So that's the first section, Abraham to David. And from David, now notice David is counted twice there. Abraham to David, then from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And so then it's the carrying away into Babylon is mentioned again. From the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. And so it doesn't mean it's like 14 plus 14 plus 14. It means there's 14 between these two. Then count David again and go another 14. Then count the Babylon guys again and go another 14. And so a lot of people have had issues with, how many are in this genealogical list. We know that Jeconias in the Geneva Bible and the Bishop's Bible, there was another guy called Jacob, which we don't go with. So usually when people say to me, so why don't you go with the Geneva Bible then? Why don't you go with the Bishop's Bible? I point that out that there's another guy, Jacob, in the genealogy, and they're like, oh, okay, because even the critical text Bibles don't have this Jacob guy. And so we want correct genealogies, we want correct lists, we want correct locations. And so what I'll do is I will read through the King James. We'll go through from verse 2 to verse 6, and then I'll read the 2016, and we'll just start moving on from there. So this is going to be sort of like a beginning. I'm probably not going to touch too much on textual criticism today, but we might look at just some of the meanings of words, and maybe we'll look at some of the Greek editions, Scrivener and Beza, and things like that. So we've got a couple of comments here. So Mark Ward is coming on my friend's channel on October the 25th to talk about the King James Version. He's a good guy, even though we would disagree about this issue. His channel is Revivalist for Christ. Okay, so that's interesting. It seemed like Mark Ward had publicly said that he's not dealing publicly with confessional bibliology proponents anymore. He's having a break from that. So that'll be interesting. So I guess he's just attacking the fundamentalists from now on. I've been wanting to get him on Standing for Truth for a debate. I'll see if he's up for a King James Version debate. I'd love to debate him. And it has been mentioned to me. Donnie said, it'd be good for you to debate Mark Ward. And I said, I'll do it any day of the week. And so I know that he doesn't respect me, because when he first came out and started saying things, I called it out and just said, look, this guy's not genuine. He's only just saying the King James has readability issues where really he's trying to push the modern versions. And at first he was like, no. And it's a bit like there was a guy recently who came out with a book about the translators to the reader. And so he was sort of making out that like the New King James is an answer to that the translators to the reader said you should keep things current and all the rest of it. Here's the New King James. That's the answer to that. But then as you go through the book, at the end, he's like, oh, all these other Bibles are fine too, ESV. So they're not dealing with the elephant in the room, which is, thousands of words missing. What are you going to do with that? Thousands of words changed. Whole entire doctrine just morphed into something that it's not supposed to be. And all of a sudden, we're demonized as snake handlers and, hillbillies because we accept the last 12 verses of Mark. And it's deceptive to not state your case straight up. And I find even when I'm witnessing street preaching, I don't bother with the how to win friends and influence people, sitting next to someone on the park bench and going, what a fine and lovely day we have here, and they're like, yes, it is nice. And it's like, I believe that there is something greater to this life. And, it's like the whole Jehovah's Witness type of way of, starting a conversation. Oh, they probably wouldn't do that unless they're door to door. But I just can't be bothered with all that. I usually go to people, and usually if I've got tracks, it just makes it so much easier. I just give them a track and say, hey, I'm a born-again Christian. I'm just out telling people about Jesus Christ. And so they know straight up what they're dealing with. If they want to talk to me about that, they will. If not, they'll say, sorry, I'm not interested. Okay. And I'll find someone who is. And so it just cuts through all that rubbish, and I hate the whole awkwardness of, hey, we've started this conversation and I know that they want to back out. And it's like, now I want to introduce Jesus. It's almost deceptive doing that. It is deceptive. It's basically people have they've molded evangelism. Now, some people do this naturally. They're sitting on a plane, they start a conversation, they're just chatting, and they're like, yeah, I'm a Christian, and it just happens naturally, and that's fine. But the whole, it's like you got to sell an Amway product to someone, and the awkwardness of that is just, I just hate it. Why would we think that if someone's first initial encounter with Christianity is someone being deceptively nice to them so they can get to the point, it's not good. Just be straight out with them. I find that just cuts through all the rubbish. And so this is the problem with a lot of these text critics. They're using that type of methodology, like, let's not go to the King James only crowd and upset them all and say that their Bible is, a piece of trash that we need to flush down the toilet. Let's say that they're going against their initial principles of the translators, and here's the New King James. Here's another TR-based Bible that they can go to. But why would people who are reading the ESV, NIV, and all that, why are they promoting that? If they were promoting the New King James, I'd go, wow, yeah, cool. Okay, well, that's your point. That's, that would almost be an in-house TR thing. You know what I mean? But they're not. They're from the outside, dressed up as a New King James guy. And it's like, this isn't sitting right. And I just hate that double speak. It's like, just come out and say exactly what you mean. So anyway, there's my 5 minutes of hate. If you don't know what the 5 minutes of hate is, I think it's the 3 minutes of hate. They have it in 1984, where they have the picture of the enemy and they have to scream out the loudest they can. And 1984 is a brilliant movie. It's got a couple of scenes in it which have nudity in it, so I'll just warn you. But it is a good depiction of the book. So it was done in the 1980s as well. So it's a pretty amazing movie, and it depicts. It's got torture scenes in it. It's got, the whole Room 101. A lot of Orwellian sayings in it because Orwell wrote the book on it. Or just read the book, 1984. So a lot of hellos and highs. And Nick, you started a little earlier this time. Yeah, so I did, because we have daylight savings here in Australia, which is, they just keep fiddling with the times. It's so annoying because we're right near a border as well, which they refuse to have daylight savings. So now when we catch a plane, we have to work out our time and their time and try to get up there. Are we an hour early or an hour late? And you always, sometimes you forget that daylight savings has changed. And because your clock's automatically on your phone nowadays, they usually just go straight over. Half the time you don't even realize. It's like, oh, was it daylight savings last night? Did it change over? And so sometimes you get an hour less sleep, or you're waking up earlier. And so anyway, that's why I've started earlier. Anyway, so let's get back to this study. So I'm going to read through the King James, and we'll just read through that together. And I know this is probably the most boring part of the Bible, and a lot of people skip through this. I have told the story before, but I'll tell it again, about how in New Guinea, some missionaries, they wanted to translate the Gospel of Matthew. So they went to Matthew 1 to Matthew 17 and thought, let's just skip the genealogy for the moment. Let's just go through and just start from, where the action starts, where the narrative starts. And so they went through and translated it, and they found that people weren't really taking them seriously. So that I think they were with like New Earth Tribe or something like that. Not New Earth Tribe. That's a cult, local cult, charismatic, like Bethel plant. Something tribe. Anyway, you probably know what I'm talking about. They're missionary guys, like New World Tribe or something. So anyway, these guys translated the whole Gospel of Matthew, and they found there was hardly any response. So they went back and translated the genealogy, and then people were coming up to them saying, oh, so this is a true story. Because how they used to tell true stories in Papua New Guinea culture, with that particular tribe, and in many of the tribes they do this, they would go through and have a genealogical list. And so they'd say, okay, so my father this, and his father that, and his father, and they go back to that time, trace it back, and then they'd say, this is what they did. And so that was their method of talking about a true story. So having this type of genealogical list gave validity to them believing that it was a true story of different people. And so many of them got converted. So obviously for the Jews, this was very important. Now, for the methodology that I've been pushing for, that verse 1 is a standalone verse for the whole book. And then from verse 2 to verse 17 is basically showing you the cursed genealogy of Joseph, Jesus' stepfather, not a genealogical father, but his stepfather, because of this guy, Jeconiah. So Jeconiah, he was cursed by God, and God said, no one from your seed will ever sit on the throne of David again. So that was the time when they carried away to Babylon. And then when they came back, there was basically this line comes back down through to Joseph, okay, the husband of Mary. So this is the cursed line of Joseph. So this is why there's a virgin birth. And this is, I think the Jews perhaps even knew this. This could have been one of the reasons why they're like, well, we don't accept Jesus. His father has Jeconiah in it. How can this guy say he's the king of the Jews and sit in the king's place when there's a cursed genealogy there and all this sort of stuff? So there's a lot of issues that going through this genealogy that we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at all those things once we get there. And so, yeah, it makes a big difference having the book of the genealogy of Jesus or the book of the generation and this whole verse is a standalone verse. Then it's like, okay, that's all good. Now let's talk about the reality about the unfortunate lineage of Joseph. Let's talk about how he has this unfortunately cursed line, not because of any fault of his own. He was a righteous man. He was a good guy, but he had this type of curse upon him in the Old Testament, and that carried through to him. Now, obviously, all those curses are now broken through the blood of Jesus Christ. It's quite interesting that God promised that he would do certain things to certain nations, and some of those do carry over till today. But I should really clarify myself. Any inherited curse, probably not to do with sitting as a king, because that no longer is relevant because Jesus is the king. So we all actually become kings and priests, so which is quite interesting. So even someone who has this lineage, they can officially just say, Joseph and Mary afterwards, because they had their firstborn son down here. So that's their firstborn. So obviously it's not only son. Jesus wasn't their only son. They had first because it's up to 6 other siblings. And so some of them would have become Christians, obviously James and others. And so imagine James, he's like looking at this going, man, my father's lineage was cursed. No one was allowed to sit on the throne of David from there. But because James was in Christ, he became a king and a priest and a prophet. So it's quite interesting. So that curse is broken. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. In Christ, a lot of these curses are gone. They're broken. God's no longer seeing nationalities and families and all that sort of stuff. He's looking at the individual. And when we become linked to Christ, we get what Christ has. If Christ is blessed, we are blessed. So that's why we shouldn't really evaluate things now according to nationality. I know it's hard not to. Like when I first went to Indonesia is the biggest Muslim country in the world. It's our next door neighbor. And when I first went there, I ran into lots of Christians were preaching in the churches. We had the churches shut down by the militia. They turned up with machine guns and all sorts of things. But Indonesia is quite an open country. It's open to the gospel. Lots of Christians there, and Christianity is having a huge impact there. Now, when I went there, at the time, people were talking about a war between Australia and Indonesia. I guess it's almost like in America, a war with Russia. It's just this underlying thing that people just every now and then they want to talk about when they want to spook everyone into buying weapons from some big corporation or something. And I was thinking, like, imagine if we had a war with these Indonesian guys and I was drafted and they were drafted too by their side, and we had to fight against each other. Here's these Christians like shooting at each other. And I thought, and see, I'm a complete pacifist. I used to be involved in a church group that sort of elevated the military. It was sort of like the church plant came from America, but they sort of elevated the military. Like if you were part of the military, you would be a strong Christian. If you were part of the military, you made a great pastor. If you were part of the military, you would, have all this discipline in your life. And so you would just sort of slot into being a good believer. And we were sort of taught those principles. So we would learn those type of principles as people, as disciples and as people aspiring to be pastors and things like that. But I started really questioning that because, obviously with the Iraq war, with our generation, we've seen that a lot of immoral things went down, and the whole concept of why that war started. It's like, why are we there again? It's George Bush's mates, and Dick Cheney and Halliburton and GE, and they're making money from this. So there was really no reason to be there. The whole terror thing, ISIS and all this stuff. It's like, when you understand that basically even Hillary Clinton admitted that they created Al-Qaeda. If you understand the history of Afghanistan in 1978, they basically created the Al-Qaeda, Mujahideen. The Mujahideen became demonized, and after the Cold War, they needed an enemy to keep the military-industrial complex going, and so the Muslims in the Middle East just became a really easy sort of target to, point blame to. So Osama bin Laden, who used to work for the Americans, he was the next target. And so they've sort of, it's interesting. America has a lot of fake enemies. And the thing is, I'm not saying this just from just shooting from the hip. I know this stuff. I've read tons of books. The sort of books that I've read, like this one, the Legacy of Ashes, the history of the CIA. I've probably read about 50 books like that to do with American intervention, war, things like that. And so where am I going with all this? I'm sort of rabbit trailing. Yeah, it's not really a good TR study if I'm just talking about war and things like that. But what I was talking about was the pastors were trained in a military type of fashion. And I can understand that, but really what a pastor should be trained in is servanthood, because then you've got a guy up the front, sort of like a drill sergeant, telling you what to do and how to do it. And, oh, you haven't made it to church, you're weak, It's like, instead of being a servant, and the whole thing about Christianity is serving people. And so there is... there's a lot to be said with what's happening today. And Australia, Australia basically just follows America into every war. We've been to Iraq, we've been to Afghanistan. We were there in Korea, Vietnam. We lost 100,000 guys in Vietnam. It's we've basically been through the same things that Americans have been through, but most Australians are sort of anti-war. We don't have the huge propaganda that you guys have there. We have 3,000 American troops here at the moment, just sitting here. There's 60,000 troops in Germany at the moment, because there's 1,000 military bases around the world. So America has sort of become the new Rome. Instead of having the British colonial outposts sort of thing, they've got their bases. And anyway, I'm rabbit trailing. And we're reading through a genealogy, and I'm talking about the military-industrial complex. I'm going to read through this. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brethren. And Judah begat Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram. And Ram begot Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed by Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. And Jesse begot David the king, and David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Okay, so I'm just going to read through the 2016 edition. Okay, Matthew 1. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brethren. And Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Yeah, this is it. And Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram. And Ram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon. And Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed by Ruth, and Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David the king, and David the king begot Solomon of her who had been the wife of Uriah. Okay, so seeing we are on a roll here, Matthew 1, 2 to 6. Let's go through some of the modern versions as well. So we're looking at the NIV. So maybe I should... Yeah, NIV, that's fine. Abraham was the father of Isaac, so you can see that difference there. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father. Now, why didn't I put the father? Because people automatically think, some of this is true. Abraham was the father of Isaac. But there are some places where I don't think Matthew was really that concerned with having the list going each consecutive generation. What he was doing was sometimes he would have a grandfather and then the grandson. And so he would skip a few generations. And so I think he was more concerned with having 3 chunks of 14. Now, why he did that, I'm not really sure. Perhaps that was how they kept the tax records, maybe, of people in those days. It's like, okay, what house are these people from? Okay. And maybe they had 14 columns that they had to fill in. They're from here, they're from there, they're from there. And just sort of keeping the highlights. So people knew which, they're Jewish, they're from Abraham. Okay, or they're from the line of David. Okay, they're from, this tribe or whatever. And so they're related to these other people. And so it might get more detailed as it got closer to the end of the genealogy. I'm only just suggesting that. I've read quite a lot about the genealogy, and there's a whole bunch of speculation. And I guess as we get further and further putting our feet into the shoes of people who were of that era, the Jews of that era, reading their documentation and going through the Old Testament lists and things like that, we'll learn more and more about that and what they did. So Docky says, I think the US daylight savings changes in 2 weeks. Hello, Nick and others in the chat. Good to see you today. Yes, and so another welcome there. So let's look at the ESV. We'll just go through some of them. Maybe the 21st century King James Bible. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah. So notice he's even changed Judah from Judas and his brethren. And Judah begat Perez and Zara by Tamar, and Perez begat Hezron, Hezron begat Aram. So it doesn't look like there's much change there, except for maybe Judas there. American Standard Bible, they still have the begat, like the King James. Very similar to the King James, it looks like. They've got a few footnotes, Aram for Ram. Let's check out the Amplified Bible and see if they amplify everything. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father. See, the thing is, that's what I was saying. That's true in that verse, but in other verses, it's having the father of, it just confuses things. So having begot or begat gets rid of that confusion. So there's no point going through all of these because they're all pretty much saying the same thing. We'll go through some of the older Bibles on the Textus Receptus website. Maybe I'll read the New King James. That would be very similar, actually. Abraham begot Isaac. Yes, so it's very, very similar. Maybe the modern English version, MEV. Yeah, they have the father of. And so what I really need to do is go through and grab, say, like verse 2 and really study that through. So I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. If you go to, if you type in kjv.org.au, it'll redirect you to this site. This is part of Textus Receptus Bible's site as well. So this isn't my website. Keith Mason has made this, and he just wanted to show the differences between my Bible 2016 and the 1900 King James Version. So you can go through and you can check that out. So I just have kept that open to show you. Okay, so this is the other part of his website, the same website. So he's got my one at the top, and then it goes through the King James editions and then Green's. And so we might go through this and see if there's any huge difference. So obviously, one of the main differences that I've got in all this is begot. So Abraham begat Isaac, or Abraham begot Isaac. And so, And so Greens has fathered. This one, I'm not really sure about this one, but it's the Smith translation. They have begat. The Young's has begat as well. The Webster's Bible has begat. Bishop's has begat as well. Geneva has begat with an E on the end. Great Bible has begat. Matthews has begat. Coverdale has begat. Tyndale has begat. Wycliffe has begat. The Wessex Gospels has gestreonide. Gestreonide. So that's a pretty big word. It's obviously meaning something like begat or begot. So, and then an English majority text version, I'm not sure what that one is, but that's fathered, which I would say is not really accurate. So let's go to Matthew 1:2 on my website. We'll go through what I've got there. Now, a lot of it is lacking. Sorry about that, guys. So I do have stuff, but like say the pictures of Cephalus, like say compare it to Matthew 1:1. There's not that much information, but there's still quite a lot of information. So we'll just go through it. So here we have the edition of Theodore Beza, his fifth major edition, the 1598. So this is what the King James translators used. So Abraham egenesen ton Isaac, Isaac der egenesen ton Yaakov, Yaakov der egenesen ton Judan, Kitois Adelphos Afto in the Greek. And then we've got the King James, Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. I've got Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begat Judah and his brethren. So let's go through what commentary I have here. So I've got an interlinear here. So yeah, most of these are just going to be nouns, proper names. You might get a conjunction like there, or a definite article like ton, or Adelphos, his brethren, after. And so I actually haven't written in there what they are. So that's what I mean. I haven't completely finished that chart there. That needs to be worked on. But let's go through the commentary. So Matthew 1:2 is the second verse of the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. The verse is part of the section where the genealogy of Joseph, the legal father of Jesus, is listed. The 12 of Judah's brothers were the ancestors of the tribe from which the Messiah would come, and thus were mentioned here. The inclusion of the brothers is thus a reminder to the readers that this is from a group where the Messiah will come. This same genealogy is prefixed in 6 different places in the Old Testament. And so, yeah, obviously we got Abraham mentioned, and so I've got a study on him. But Abraham, he begot. And so egenese is translated as begat in the King James Version 1611 and in the 1900 King James Version, and begot in the King James Version 2016 edition. From Middle English, begetten, begetten, from Old English, begotten, to get, to find, to acquire, to attain, to receive, to take, to seize, to happen, to beget. From Proto-Germanic, begetana, to find, to seize, equivalent to be plus get. Cognate with Old Saxon begitten, to find, to seize. Old High German begiesen, to gain, to achieve, to win, to procure. And so I've got see also begotten, beget, and the movable nu. Now, one of the reasons why I kept that as well instead of fathered was because we use words like only begotten son. Now, that has been morphed to mean the unique son by people who want to squeeze in the reading monogenes theos in John chapter 1, verse 18, where it should say monogenes weos, which means only begotten son. They want only begotten God there. But having an only begotten God, like the New American Standard Version has it, it's a Gnostic type of reading. And so the Gnostics promoted this type of thing. Many people came against this type of concept of an only begotten God. And so what's had to have happened in translation circles is they've redefined this term, monogenes, to mean one and only, or one of a kind. So even in John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son," instead of only begotten son. So that's why I believe keeping begot in a sense of an update of begat in the 2016 is important, and it's related to that type of thing as well. And so even though we do see that Jesus, he obviously isn't a begotten as in, the Father and the Holy Spirit are like the mother and he's the son. We use that type of human terminology to describe who Jesus is, and he describes himself as that, the Son of God and Son of Man and this type of thing. But we know that there is an eternal existence of the Son, of the Father, and of the Holy Spirit. And so I think by having fathered, it can change that type of terminology into something that it can just start muddying the waters. And we want to keep the waters as pure as possible. So then we have the movable nu. So I'll just quickly go there. So many times, if you look at the Greek, it will have egenesen with a nu on the end. So these two letters here are nus, okay? So it has egenese, that's usually what it has in the Reformation period, but modern Bibles might have egenesen. So it's a movable nu, and the reason that we have the movable nu, it's sort of stylistic, but it's to do with the grammatical form, because we don't say a apple, because you can't have the vowels facing each other. We have an apple. So we put the N there to make it soft, so that we don't have vowels facing each other. And so that, or else that would cause a basic sort of grammatical blunder in English. So it's the same in Greek. And so so Isaac, so then we have Isaac. Isaac's birth is a miraculous one according to the Old Testament, and thus there is some symmetry with both the first and the last births mentioned in the genealogy being miraculous ones. And so, it's quite interesting. When you go through these characters, I know it's just a genealogical list, but I mean, you've got, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, mentioned in verse 2 here. And so that's those three generations. And I've heard sermons on it that have sort of blown my mind, but I've completely forgotten what they were about. But the whole concept of what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is and who they are is quite amazing. So we have Isaac being miraculously born. Obviously, Abraham and Sarah, they were promised that they would have a son, and so they waited and waited, and Abraham went into Hagar and immediately conceived. It's quite interesting. If you go into the world, you will have fruit. If you want to be like Hillsong and have a lot of followers and all the rest of it, just become worldly and everyone will go to your church. But if you want to be faithful to God and his promises, just stick with it. and you have your Isaac. And so Isaac was promised, and Isaac comes from the Hebrew word sark, which means to laugh. So Isaac, usually when you put a yod in front of a word, it can become a name, like Hova, which means to be, is where we get Yehovah. It's a name from Hava, meaning to be, or it's the if you were to say I am in the first person, we would say God is. He is. He exists. He is Jehovah, the I am. So yeah, we've got Isaac, we've got Jacob, we've got Judah or Judas. And so I haven't got that much written about these guys here. Obviously, there's so much that could be written about each one of these, but I would just encourage people to go back to the book of Genesis and read through some of those. And his brethren, Katois Adelphos Afdo. So the King James brethren is changed to brothers in the New King James, okay? But brethren means both brothers and sisters when that context warrants it, okay? So, for example, in Matthew chapter 12, it has, in verse 47, then one said unto them, behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he answered and said unto them that told him, who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hands toward his disciples and said, behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. So you notice here, he's saying two things. Who is my brother and who are my brethren, okay? But then he clarifies what brethren means. It means a brother and sister, okay? Because he's already mentioned the mother, and that's mentioned down here. But when he mentions brethren, it means brother and sister. That's why we say brethren, to the church, that they're the brethren. And so here, a lot of the times in English, brethren can mean just brothers. But it can also include sisters as it's used in this context here. So thus in context, Jesus' sisters are also considered brethren. In Matthew 1:2, the brethren included Dinah and the sister of Judah. Thus, brothers is not as accurate as brethren. So the New King James has brothers, but how do we know that Matthew wasn't including the sisters here as well? And so that's got to be taken into consideration, and that's why I've left brethren there. And I think brethren is a word. It's not like a false friend or anything like that. It's a great word that people use today. Mark Ward is always critical. So this is standing for truth. Hey, Donnie, good to see you. Mark Ward is always critical of the King James Version. He needs to step up and debate. Mark Ward versus Nick Sales or Will Kinney. I'm not sure who Nick Sales is. No, I'm just teasing you, mate. You made a spelling mistake. Keep up the good work, brother Nick. Yeah, that'd be awesome to have a debate with Mark Ward. Maybe he can choose the topic, because, sometimes people are scared. Maybe he can choose the topic and how, the format and everything like that. And I'll still steamroll over him. So here's some of the differences in King James editions. Okay, so and I'm including the 2016 as an edition. Obviously, the 1900 Pure Cambridge edition is mostly like Blaney, but with some spelling updates. Okay, so Abraham begate, and so it has an E on the end, where 1611 begate, 1900 begat, 2016 begot. Okay, Isaac. So here we have in the 1900 the use of the semicolon, where in the 1611 it was just a comma, and it's been taken back to a comma here. And so that's about all the changes except for Judas. So Judas, notice here too, you have the J was basically an I, and then it soon after became a J, and we pronounce it as a strong J now. But there is some call for people saying, like, say we look at the word hallelujah, it's hallelujah, okay? But we don't say that. And a lot of people think that perhaps these words were actually pronounced like that. Instead of Judas, it was Judas. And you find that in a lot of the Germanic languages, like even in German, they would say Jehovah, and we would say Jehovah. And so I think because we are very a literary society, and we've also gone from being in England to dispersed all over the world, to America, to Australia, to South Africa, to everywhere, India. And we're reading books and say, how do you pronounce this? And we're pronouncing it with the phonetic J. So the J just constantly became stronger. Oftentimes we pronounce things when they were first written. It's like most English words, you have to sort of know how the locals sound it. I mean, it's amazing. Some languages are just the phonetics match how it's spelt. That's how most languages work. In English, we've kept with certain forms and styles, and we put a K in front of night and knife, and that helps us to know whether the word comes from Latin or not, and all this sort of stuff. And so there are some people saying that Judas, it might have been Judas instead of Judas, or Jesus, or instead of Jesus. And so I guess we'll have to figure those things out, but it's not really that important. I guess to the sacred namers, you got to name God exactly. Yehoshua or something. That's the real name of God. If you don't sound it with a, you're going straight to hell. So Matthew's genealogy is considerably more complex than Luke's. It is overtly schematic, organized into 3 tessera decets, or sets of 14, each of a distinct character. So the first is rich in annotations, including 4 mothers and mentioning the brothers of Judah and the brother Zerah of Perez. The second spans the Davidic royal line, but omits several generations, ending with Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. So the last, which appears to span only 13 generations, connects Joseph to Zerubbabel through a series of otherwise unknown names, remarkably few for such a long period. The total of 42 generations is achieved only by omitting several names. So the choice of 3 sets of 14 seems deliberate. Various explanations have been suggested. 14 is twice 7, symbolizing perfection and covenant, and is also the gematria numerical value of the name David. I wouldn't suggest that. What I would suggest is perhaps because Matthew was a tax collector, when he was writing out the lineage of certain families, he did it. Perhaps they were given, that they wanted to know where people were from. So perhaps they were only given 14 lines to do that type of genealogy. To me, that would make sense. And he's just putting the highlights in. He is under no obligation to just write the whole every single person out. He just has these 3 groups of 14. So he's put the highlights, first group, second group, third group, just so people know by tracing through that, you get the gist. And along the way, he's mentioned a few, a few people, okay, yeah, he was the wife of Uriah, just a few things so that we can know exactly where he's going with it. So I've got a couple of pictures here, which I've borrowed, or when they stole them, from Wikipedia. So this is a a Jesse tree. Okay, so that's in Latin. So it's got a tree coming out of this guy. So this was a Jesse tree by Master James IV of Scotland. It illustrates the genealogy that begins in this verse. So that's interesting. So I put that there because it makes sense to be, the root of Jesse. It makes sense that it's not a genealogy of Christ, but a genealogy of Joseph, and it begins in this verse. What was the other picture? It was Michelangelo's destroyed Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. So this is a sketch of it. I'm not sure where it got destroyed or what happened with it, but oftentimes in history, these type of things are important because this is around the time of the Reformation. This is around the time of Erasmus and Luther, and many times that they would have seen these type of things and known about them. It's just part of history. And so I was reading an interesting article. I'll just quickly show you about Erasmus. So I've got this picture of Erasmus. He looks pretty radical here. And this was it Durant? I think it is. But he was talking about the book that he has his hand on, and it's basically saying he's Hercules. And this is Erasmus, what he's done in his generation was equivalent to Hercules, sort of thing. And then it talks about what these other books were and all the rest of it. And so, quite an interesting article. I might just throw that up here because I've got it open. I was just checking out his relationship with Aldous. I actually raising the ghost of Arius. It's a 1 John 5:7 critique. Let's have a quick look. Hopefully I can get it. I think I shut the page. So, oh no, I didn't. Anyway, I am Robert trailing again. Maybe. No, it's not behind there. Maybe it's behind it. Yeah, no, it's not. So don't worry about it. Okay, well, I'll get back to where we were. Main page. Matthew 1:2. So we looked at the movable new. We don't need that. We don't need that open. Well, let's just jump down to the Greek then. Okay, so we've read through a little bit of a commentary, but not too much. The Textus Receptus. So the Complutensian polyglot. And so the thing is, I haven't copied and pasted this from anywhere. I've gotten this from the picture because I just don't trust a lot of what people write. And so, like with the Aldine, it has these lines above the A's, and so I've put them there as well. I don't know what significance they have, but so these I've copied out, and so I can't be accused by Mark Ward of not looking at manuscripts, not looking at when you look at Matthew 1:1 and the amount of manuscript evidence that I've got there, and the amount of printed Bibles that I've got put there, and going through and making sure they match up with the original source documents that I've got. These guys can never accuse me of being, not looking at the sources or being afraid of variance for some reason. It's just silly. So here we have the Complutensian. I'll open that in a new window. So just to show you what I've done here. So you can see probably the only thing that I don't have is these letters, like the K, L, O, because these letters all go back to the Latin, because this was a parallel Latin. And you could look up every single word. So the Complutensian polyglot is huge. I would recommend people actually go and check it out. So if you want to find it, it's on archive. And it's absolutely huge. And so you have like the Old Testament, Hebrew, Syriac, Latin. It's full polyglot. But you also have a bunch of dictionaries in there as well. So I'm pretty sure it's the New Testament portion, which has all the dictionaries. So firstly, it has like the New Testament, obviously. So this is Matthew. And so I don't have to go to Matthew 1:1. We've already looked at that. But if I go to near the end here, it's got all this sort of stuff. What is this? Let's have a look. We'll go to one page. We'll zoom in a little bit. And this is like a dictionary for a lot of the Hebrew words. So they had the Greek Septuagint, they had the Hebrew, and so there's a lot of material here. And then they also have Greek dictionary as well. So even just if you were to do Bible studies through the Complutensian Polyglot and work these things out, there's a lot here to be studied. This is a full proper study Bible, lists of names and where they appear and all the rest of it. And so quite an incredible feat for 1514. Quite amazing. I can imagine proofreading through that in Latin about Hebrew, talking about the Septuagint, talking about differences, talking about textual criticism. This is a huge amount of work. Okay, so here we have for Greek, the Greek dictionary, and so monogenes, and so it just has what the Latin equivalent is here. So you can look those up. So what all these words mean, etc. In the Latin, in the Greek. A lot of work gone into this. But yeah, so usually you've got the Greek and then you've got the Latin. And so their numbering system is to show you which Latin words match up. So I guess on my website, like I've already put in, even I've got the lines, the stroke. But if I was to put in the A, B, C, D thing there, I would probably have to put the parallel. So I've got a separate article here, Matthew 1:2 in the Complutensian Polyglot Bible. And so I've only just put in the same information that I got in Matthew 1. But really what I should do is put in all those little numbers and then put the Latin next to it. So then it's basically equivalent to what they have, and then probably go through and look at the definitions and what they say. So this helps a lot too, because a lot of people in that era, they couldn't read Greek, but they could read Latin fluently. So they actually taught themselves the Greek or the Latin or whatever they were going through. And this helped the translators as well, because they could look and say, okay, it says a Genesis here, but in the Latin, it's if we look up number B or whatever in that verse, what does it match up with in the Latin? Oh, it means that. Usually that's translated this way, and so that would help them in their translation. See, nowadays most people just copy what everyone else has done. That's how translations are formed. But we're talking about the beginning of printing. This is a new field, and also Greek had absolutely boomed in Europe because of the fall of Constantinople about 60 years before. And so you're probably looking at 50 to 40 years beforehand when the Complutensian Polyglot started. So that's in 1502. So, so that's just to show you that it is accurate there. So anyway, that's the Complutensian. It has Abraham egenesen ton Isaac, Isaac de egenesen ton Yaakov, Yaakov de egenesen ton Judan, K tois Adelphos after. So it's basically exactly the same as what we have in the modern TR. The Aldine, pretty much the same thing, but here you can see that movable nu that I was talking about. So they don't have that nu on the Complutensian polyglot. So this is only 4 years later. This is the one that James White recently in the debate with Peter Van Cleek, he called it the Align edition many times. And he said it was the Align brothers. I was like, what's the Align? Aldine is named after Aldus Manutius, it's like he's just as famous, probably even more so than Stephanus, than Froben. He was like Europe's best printer. Now, he died a couple of years before this Bible, so I think that's why Erasmus actually went with a different printer, because I guess he could see the decline of Aldus Manutius. But they were good friends, and Desiderius Erasmus lived with Aldus. He was a proofreader for him for 9 months. He lived with this guy. So the greatest printer in Europe at the time, printing Greek, Erasmus was right there with him. So then we see the editions of Erasmus. I'm not going to read through all of them because, well, I don't have all of them. I've got a few there where you can go and check out the source documentation. But yeah, so anyway, that's the Aldine. I'll see if I can open that in a new window, and it's quite a big one there. Yeah, anyway, you can sort of see it here. I've got lines above the, well, that's the Abraham. Yeah, it doesn't have a line there. Abraham egenesen ton Isaac, but above the A there, above Isaac. So yeah, I learned to do that with Nomina Sacra. I learned how to do that. So we have Erasmus. Sometimes you might have, well, it looks like he's got identical to the Aldine. Now, people like James White constantly say that the Aldine and Erasmus 1516 are exactly the same. But then I've heard some people say there are differences. I would like to know that. So that would be something good to know. I need to get schooled with that. And so Helgi said, standing for truth, Donnie, I've never seen you here before. So yeah, the editions of Erasmus. So he has the new here. He's 1516, but he's 1522. He doesn't have it. And so, yeah, so that would be the main difference there. There's really no other differences in that. And so we can see the edition of Erasmus here. That's quite big. It's pretty hard to read that, but anyway, you can almost see that there anyway. And yeah, so that's the 5 editions of Erasmus. So I've only got 2 there. So yeah, sorry about that. And I don't have the Wolf Cephalus edition of 1524. And I don't have the Colonaeus edition there either. And the Colonaeus one was, Jeff Riddle actually wrote an article about how John Calvin used to use Colonaeus. Now, Colonaeus was the stepfather of Stephanus, so he had his own print shop, and he did his own edition of the Greek New Testament. Then Stephanus came along and took over his business, and that was Robert Stephanus. And then when you have Theodore Beza come along, he used Henry Stephanus, which was the son of Robert. So from 1534, well, pretty much for like 60, 70 years, probably more, 80 years, you've got Collinnaeus, Stephanus, Beza, Henry Stephanus, and Henry Stephanus also printed, Tremellius's books. Stephanus was just legendary. He printed Janius's books and a lot of Reformed material, people from the Reformation and later post-Reformation period. And so these guys are legendary. So it's interesting to know, who this guy is, and a Parisian printer. So he's from Paris. He was associated with the elder Henry Estienne. So that's, So he was associated with him and continued his work after his death in 1520. Collinnaeus married the widow of Estienne and was in charge of the press until Estienne's son Robert I entered into the business in 1526. So he had set up a shop nearby. 1528 began to use italic type. So these guys are just legends in the print world, printing lots of Greek material, lots of Latin material. Okay, so then we enter into the era of Stephanus. So the pictures don't really match up here because I've enlarged the page. So obviously that's dealing with Erasmus's 1522 there. So you have Stephanus. So you might have a small alpha there and a large one here. But apart from that, you got the movable nu there. So it's not on his first edition in 1546. So he had 1546, 1549, 1550, and 1551. So it was 3 years in a row. And then 1546 was a few years before. So you can look up those in these links here. But there's really no difference between these verses whatsoever. So then we go to Theodore Beza. I have his first edition. So you notice how I've numbered this. I've got number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. That's because Beza did 5 editions. Now, 4 of those, the 4 latter ones, are in Greek. Okay, the first edition was a Latin edition, but it commented on the Stephanus text on the Greek. So when you look at that, he will have annotations at the bottom of the page that talk in depth about the Greek, but his edition, the text is only in Latin. But Theodore Beza called this his first edition. Okay, so sometimes, and even on my website, it took me a while to get my head around this. So sometimes the 1598 can be called Beza's 4th edition, where technically it's his 5th edition. Okay. But it's actually his 4th Greek edition. So just to make things a little bit more complicated. But my reasoning matches up with Jan Kran's and how they've got how they number that type of system. So, and it makes pure sense to me. And so there's a few minor additions in between. So sometimes, like say the 1565, you've got the main edition, but then you got a special copy with his own handwritten notes. So Beza, scribbling in the margin when he was doing his 1882 edition, he used this one. And then it might just have the Greek. Some of them might just have the Latin. So the 1567 here, that's here. So I've got a link, so I can go straight there, and you can see for yourself what that is. And so verse 2, Abraham and Genecenton is an ark. And then with the Latin, a few footnotes there. I don't think this is a Syriac. No, it's just a Latin and Greek. So, but that's just one of the editions. And so then you got Tremellius's one, which is like a Latin. It's a Greek. Then you've got the Latin. So this is Beza's work. But then on the next page, you've got the Syriac of Tremellius. So it's very important that you know that this is a type of scholarship that Beza was involved in. And so here he has the Syriac Bible, but he put it in to the Hebrew font because he realized that a lot of people don't read the Syriac font. So Syriac, maybe the Syriac Bible. I'll give you an example of what the Syriac Bible would have been. Why I can't enlarge on that? That's weird. Let's go to images, Syriac Bible, visit. Yes, view images from this item. Thank you. So that's a Syriac. So how do I zoom? Yeah. That's like a written text, but it's not that different to printed. And so, yeah, you can see where Arabic, Persian, Urdu, these languages, where they come from. But what you got to understand too is Syriac is the same as Aramaic. And so that's what was Jesus speaking to his disciples. They were speaking Aramaic. They were using the Hebrew Bible. It's not that different to Hebrew. So that's why having this written in the Hebrew font was very important. And so people could, because the Hebrew was quite meticulous, and usually it was pronounced exactly how it was written. And so not like English where we have knife with a K, sort of thing. They might have, some silent letters, but usually once you know the language, you understand where that is. And so, so here we have verse 2 with Aleph, the Beit, the Resh. So this says Abraham. So you can see the big meme there. They sort of stretched it out to fill in the page. So Abraham, Genuit Ishak. So it's got Ishak there. So this is a Latin, how to say some of these words in Latin. So this would have helped a lot of scholars of that era, and especially since this is Tremellius. Tremellius was a Jewish guy who converted to Catholicism for a year and then said this is ridiculous and became a Protestant, what we would label a Protestant anyway. And he joined Geneva and started helping them, and being fluent in Hebrew, he became one of their Hebrew scholars. So he did the Syriac Bible, and so he teamed up with Theodore Beza, and they started doing this type of work together and working on the Latin Bible, working on the Syriac. And so, so it's quite interesting when you go through this source documentation. So this text here is simply just Theodore Beza's 1565 text with the Latin. And so, if you want to, so it has Matthew, Apostoli, so it's sort of like the Hebrew in the region of Palestine. So this would have been the language that was spoken by the early Jews, the early Jewish Christians. So even Theodore Beza said that the Syriac is very close to the original. So anyway, so that's the 1569 Tremellius Syriac New Testament with Beza's Greek and Latin text included. Then we've got a Latin-only text, and so they've got lots of different little ones. CSNTM have the 1588 text there. So I don't have that picture, but I do have the 1598 of Theodore Beza. So this is what the King James translators used. So they used this one. Abraham and Genesenton Isaac. the egenison Yaakov, Yaakov the egenison ton Judan Kaitos Adelphos Avdo. So he doesn't have the movable nu there, which wouldn't be translatable in the King James anyway. It's just that's why they call it the movable nu. It's some people have it, some people don't. Elias Hutter, I don't have the information. He did the 12-language dodecaglot. The Plantin polyglot, I don't have that information either. But most of that's the thing. When they're usually saying the same thing, I don't feel as pressured to go, let's make this, let's get every reading for this, something like Revelation 16:5 or 1 John 5:7 and 8. Obviously, I'm going to spend a lot more time there because that's where the battle is. But on my travels, I'm like, okay, let's look this up, and every now and then I'll throw in some Greek or some Latin or something into this. So then we have the Elzevir. The Elzevir 1524 was very close to the 1550 of Stephanus, so he doesn't have the movable nu there. And London Polyglot, I don't have that yet. John Mill, but I do have Scrivener's. So this is identical to Bezer, Abraham Agenesis on his ark. So yeah, there's really no difference there. And so yeah, I've actually called that the 1594, where that should be 1581. But the good thing is, with this, is I can just simply go here and go 81. Copy that, paste it there. It's that easy to make an edit. Okay, I'll shut the Syriac Bible down. Syriac Bible search, don't need that. Complutensium, we went through that. We don't need that open. Yeah, so you can see now it says 1881 there. So other Greek, so I've got Andrew Birch's text here, but I haven't copied it in. It's probably the same as everyone else. Then we start going through Tischendorf, Westcott and Hort, the Greek Orthodox, the Nestle text, Tregegels. So I've got to put a few years in here and sort it out. And obviously there's way more, but it's one of those texts that's not really disputed by anyone. You can still read the Tischendorf, Abraham Agenesis ton Isaac de Agenesis Yaakov, Yaakov de Agenesis ton Judan, Kaitos Adelphos Avdo. It's exactly the same as the TR, so there's really no argumentation there. I haven't got the Anglo-Saxon ones in there. English translations. So we went through this a little bit on the other site, so I won't bore you again with those. Here we have the King James. Let's just click on that. So this is how it looked. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. So they've got this little asterisk there and there. So that usually points to, here in Genesis. You can read through when those people appeared on the scene and their life story. And so that's the King James, which we love and cherish and follow. So, yeah, it was Mace's New Testament in 1729. They had the father of Jacob there. We have the primitive New Testament has begat. That's another King James one. Begat. Wesley begat. This one, 1795 begat. Webster begat. Begot in the Living Oracles. 1835. Sorry for saying that. Sometimes when I listen back on myself, I'm saying all these numbers wrong. 1849 begat. Begat. So it's only a difference between begat or begot. As we go down, so the 1885 Revised Version. So basically the Revised Version has Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judah and his brethren. So they changed Judas to Judah. So to me, that's fine. But if they'd only just done that, they just had to put in all these Greek twists and turns all the way through. And so then we've got foreign language Bibles on the website. So there's quite a lot of that. Now, I won't ruin your day by me trying to speak Danish or something. But, you know, this is a Stutton Vertaling that was basically like the King James. So the good thing is you can actually, in some verses, obviously you wouldn't do it with this one because there's no need, but in some verses you can go to these early TR-based King James type of based Bibles and double check what they had as well. The French, Giovanni Diodati, so he also did Italian Bibles as well. And so I was recently looking up some of his material and realized he did a French Bible as well. So Abraham engendara Isaac engendara Jacob engendara Judah, and ses freres. So that's interesting. Whole bunch of French Bibles, German Bibles. Obviously, the Luther one has a Bruder. That's pretty cool. I love the German language. Wish I could speak it. I saw a comment here. How many languages do you read, Nick? Like fluently, just English. But I can make out Greek. I can. It takes me a little bit longer, but I can make out the Hebrew and probably the Latin, but I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. See, with the Greek, because there's so many fake Greek scholars out there, you can just say it however you want, and people go, "Wow, that sounds reasonable," because James White's like monogenes, NRK and hologos, like speaking it like he's got this American. He calls it Erasmus, but it's just American. So when I speak, I just try to make it sound a little bit more modern, and people go, "Wow, you can speak really well." But I also do listen to a lot of Greek. So I'll show you where I get that from. It's on my Spotify, and so if I go to Matthew 1.
Του Κυρίου και Θεού και Σωτήρους ημών Ιησού Χριστού, κατά το κείμενο του Οικουμενικού Πατριαρχείου της Κωνσταντινούπολεως, εν έτη 1904.
So I'm not sure if you can hear that, but...
Το κατά Ματθαίον Άγιον Ευαγγέλιον. Κατά Ματθαίον, κεφάλαιο πρώτον. Βίβλος γενέσεως Ιησού Χριστού, Ιού Δαβίδ, Ιού Αβραάμ. Αβραάμ γέννησε τον Ισαάκ, Ισαάκ δε γέννησε τον Ιακώβ. Ιακώβ δε γέννησε τον Ιούδαν και τους αδελφούς αυτού.
So that's where, if you listen to, and on Spotify you can put on repeat the chapter. What I really want to do is have an audio with the modern Greek Bible, so that, say, at the top of this page, you can click here, you can have the audio, and also click here, you can have the English, the King James, and click here, and you can have the 2016 edition spoken as well. But that's a project in the future, because also what I can do then, just say someone was looking at the word adelphos or something like that, like an unusual word, or just say you were studying Isaac and who he was and where he's mentioned in the New Testament. Usually I've got, so with these Strong's numbers that I've worked on, I have scriptures containing these, so I can have them not just in English, but also put them in Greek, so that I can, people can have like one verse, and or they can just listen to one verse over and over and over and learn that verse as a memory verse in Greek. I think that would help a lot of people to actually read Greek. So that's part of what I want to do. So yeah, with the so I just typed in Greek Bible. Greek Bible comes up, and it's I'm pretty sure that's the 1904 edition, which isn't that different from the Textus Receptus. There's a few differences here and there, but yeah. So yeah, King James Bible Sunday School said, I can send you a pic of John Mills 1707 if you want. Yeah, and I'll just quickly show you, like, say if I was to get, like, say, Matthew 1:3 or something like that. So that section there, what I would do is I'd make it nice and big on the page, and then there's usually a button near the delete button called PRTSC or print screen. If you click on that, it just takes a screenshot. And so then I go to a program called Paint, and I'll show you how I do it. This is how I do a lot of things on my website. So I go select all, Control A, and paste it. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff there. There's me. I took a snap of that, but here's what we're after. So I'd probably get the marginal note as well, just like that. And then there's like a blank page there. That's fine. And then just sort of make sure I've got all the letters in there, and then save that as, usually a JPEG. Save that as a JPEG, and as you can see, I do that all the time, frequently. I've got heaps and heaps of 1 John 5:8, Erasmus's 1527, Vulgate, a whole heap of stuff. So that's how I do it. And so usually I save that, and then I can upload that onto my website. So that's just so just showing you how I do that. Okay, so let's continue. So where was I up to? I was looking at foreign languages. We're just sort of zipping through that. And obviously I don't have everything here either. Like, I've got the Russian Synodal version. A few Spanish editions. Now, some of these are in copyright as well, so I don't really bother with them much. People can look them up elsewhere. But there's heaps that I don't have. Okay. Obviously, this verse isn't really a verse that everyone's fighting over to memorize or anything like that. So I do have verse-specific commentaries. Matthew 1:2, Adam Clark's commentary, Abraham begat Isaac. In this genealogy, those persons only among the ancestors of Christ, which form the direct line as specified. Hence, no mention is made of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, nor of Esau, the son of Isaac, and of all the 12 patriarchs or sons of Jacob. Judah alone is mentioned. So maybe I should actually go through some of these commentaries, because or else I'm going to run out of content. I can go through and read, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, and so, but maybe this is a bit of a closure for verse 2. I think we've sort of, it's not that exciting, and so why hang around here too much? So I'll just open some of these, and then I may as well open all of them. And then we can just read through these. Hopefully they're nice and small, like the Adam Clark one. But it's quite interesting just going through these. Sometimes there can be something that can just trigger your thoughts and can help you understand the verse and understand the culture a little bit different. And you can also see then where, why people have written things the way they have, or why a modern version would have that type of thing. Okay, so they don't have it. So they've got Matthew 1:1. That's fine. That was Abbott's. Alfred's doesn't have it. Barnes doesn't have it. So this is pretty good. So it just means we're going to get through this quickly. So maybe I actually haven't put all that information in. It looks like I have. I've just put Matthew 1:1 there, though. So maybe, yeah, that was a waste of 1 minute of your life. So let's go to Matthew 1:3. We may as well just keep going through, and we'll try and get through these. And there might be something interesting written in the commentary. There mightn't be anything written. Oh yeah, so we have a bit of a variant there, and so we'll read through that. And like with the other page, there's going to be things missing. I haven't even got the 1598, which is usually bog standard sort of stuff for me. I've got the picture of it, but I haven't written it out because obviously Matthew 1:3 is not, I'm not getting emails at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, can you help me with Matthew 1:3? I'm struggling. Usually it's some obscure verse, or not obscure, some verse that's contested, So Matthew 1:3, kata Matheon, Judas there. So the delta is, they say delta, not delta. Judas there egenese ton phares, katon zara ektes thama. Phares there egenesen ton Esrom there egenesen ton Aram. Okay, so the King James says, and Judas begat Phares and Zara of Thamar, and Phares begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram. 2016 has, and Judah begot Perez and Zara by Tamar, and Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram. And so as you can see, there is a change in a lot of those names, and so that's something that I've really got to think about checking, and not just trusting in modern scholarship. I've got to weigh all those things up. So then we have the interlinear, which takes a lot of time to work out, and so, but most of these are just names as mentioned before. But here we can compare, the 1611, 1900, and 2016. Judas, or Judah, and. So that's the there. So sometimes it's good to know that that can be translated as and. And the different spelling of begate, Phares, and Perez. So you can see the difference in spelling that I've got. The Thamar becomes Tamar. Phares becomes Perez, Esrom becomes Hezron, Aram becomes Ram. So these are things that are, at the moment, I'm leaving it as it is, but I'm double checking over all of that. And so Helgi said, Bengel's Gnomon is a very interesting work, but it's strange how he defends 1 John 5:7, but rejects many other TR readings that are more attested than the comma. That's interesting, because I was actually looking up Bengel's Gnomon just last night, because I was starting again the issue on Revelation. So maybe I've got it here. What have I got? Yeah, the issue of the last 6 verses of Revelation, and so I was just going through some of the pages to do with that, and I came across the Gnomon of Bengal, because Bengal, I better not open all those pages, but Bengal had come against Erasmus quite fiercely, and he was basically saying that so Helgi says I have an edition of the Gnomon from the 1700s in Swedish, founded in the Uppsala in 1992. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, because some of these guys, like he said, Erasmus only used one manuscript for Revelation, and then they conveniently found the Reuchling's Codex, and it just makes you wonder. It's like, oh, that proves that he only used one manuscript, sort of thing. And usually, and he actually predicted the end of the world or the rapture was going to happen in 1836. So usually, when someone predicts something and he's wrong like that, how's he going to predict that? That they'll find proof that Erasmus only used one manuscript, and then a few years later they find it. It just seems sus. I'm just sus on that whole thing. And so I guess in a way, I'm going through a lot of his material and just seeing what he was saying about Erasmus. And but yeah, interesting, very interesting that we're sort of looking at the same material there. Matthew 1:3 is the third verse of the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. The verse is part of the section where the genealogy of Joseph, the legal father of Jesus, is listed. Tamar, the wife of Judah, is the first of 4 women that are added to Matthew's genealogy. 1:5 mentions Ruth and Rahab, whilst 1:6 Bathsheba, wife of Uriah the Hittite, is mentioned indirectly. So here we have Papyrus 1 has Zareh, or Zerah, instead of Zara. So it's pretty much going to be pronounced the same. So that could just prove that it was written down from audio, that someone was speaking it and they were writing it. Yes, Rel, so that means all other manuscripts. But we have Codex Vaticanus has that, and MAE 1. So I'm not sure what MAE 1 is. I'm just going to look at that. No, it's not giving us a quick answer, so I won't go there. You can probably find that out by looking on my phone, but it'll take too long. Begot. So I've basically copied and pasted that from the previous one. But we have a lovely picture here of Papyrus 1. And so we've got Pharaz there. You can see that. So I'm not sure where Zerah is there. Okay, Pharaz Ezrom. Okay, Pharaz is just, Zara is just before that. So we've got Pharaz. So yeah, I can't see Zara there, but it's a little bit blurry, the picture. But yeah, so we won't go there. So let's just go down. We've got the Complutensian Polyglot again. I haven't written that out yet, or anything about Erasmus, or pretty much anything. I got the 1550 there, which is a start. 1546 is there. I haven't copied it out yet, though, but it's there. 1551 is there. Theodore Beza's 1565 edition is here in an old school type manuscript. And so then we have the 1567 and Beza's 1598. So I haven't got that written out, which is pretty bad. So this is the text underlying the King James. So it has Judas the Egenesen. So there's a Genese, nu, ton Pharaz, Python Zara Ektes Thamar, Pharaz the Egenesen, ton Ezrom the Egenesen ton Aram. So notice how it has there, but then it has this fancy looking ligature, which is there. It's the same word. And you have ton here. It's quite readable. T-O-N. Tau Omicron Nu. But then you just have this there. So it's quite interesting where they put these ligatures and why they did them. I guess as we go further along and reading through the Greek and learning more and more, we'll see patterns of why they did this sort of thing. And a lot of the time they're learning stuff from manuscripts too. So they're doing stuff like copying over Nomina Sacra and things like that. So I've got nothing on Elzevirs. I've got Scriveners. The date's wrong again. But yeah, pretty much identical to Beza, but has the new there. So Beza's has no new there. So I've got a whole bunch of work there, but I have got Zara, the Vaticanus, 1209. So if you see 1209, that's Codex Vaticanus. It's definitely speaking about that, which is the one that Erasmus examined and the one that's become the cornerstone manuscript for modern Bibles, or basically there's only really two. There's Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, so I wouldn't call it the cornerstone, maybe the half the block of cheese. the other one's Sinaiticus, and the others just sort of either back them up or there's very few other standalone issues. So yeah, it has Zara or Zare there. So that's a footnote in the 1788 text of Andre Birch. Westcott and Hort text, they just have Zara there. There's really no change. Greek Orthodox Church. And in the English, Judas beget Phares, so he spelled it like that. Tamar and Thamar, Phares beget. So we're looking at the difference between Tyndale and Wycliffe. Then we go to Coverdale. Very similar. Great Bible, very similar. So then we got the King James Version. Let's have a look at that. And Judas beget Phares and Zara of Thamar, and Phares beget Ezrom, and Ezrom beget Aram, with Phares being mentioned in these other places, and Judas or Judah. The Webster's edition. So yeah, there's really not much to see here. It's just technical jargon. So let's move to the next verse. Let's get to verse 6. We'll see if we can just fly through this. So verse 4, Aram the Egeneseton Aminadav, and many times the beta is a V, Aminadav. Aminadav the Egenesenton Ne'eson, Ne'eson the Egenesenton Salomon. The King James 1900 Pure Cambridge edition has, and Aaron begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Naason, and Naason begat Salmon. The 2016 edition has, and Ram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Naashon, and Naashon begat Salmon. Okay, so let's have a look and see if I've got anything new or interesting. So we can see the differences between the King James Version and 2016. So this would probably be one of the bigger ones, Ram or Aram. Sometimes the A is silent in Hebrew, but I've got to really look and examine that. I've got Naashon or Naashon. Sometimes the difference between having a seen or a sheen, it can be how things are pronounced according to a Jew or an Arab. I mean, if you talk to an Israeli, many times they say, look, Arabic is just Israeli, but you don't say sh. So instead of saying salam, you say shalom. So if you meet an Arab and you say salam alaikum, and they say walaikum salam, that's how they say, sort of like a greeting. But the Jews say shalom aleichem, and they say aleichem shalom back. So it's just a sh and a kem, or cum. It's just a few pronunciation differences. It's very similar. So that's why if you're going to learn Hebrew, learning living languages like Arabic or modern day Hebrew really helps you. I would recommend that you go that route. To me, it's like reading. It's like learning about how to raise children when you don't have kids of your own. It's like you can know all about that and know what to do, but it's like it's different when you got your own kids. So obviously, you can learn a lot about languages, but learning from people who are engulfed in those languages can help. And sure, yeah, you can tweak a few things here and there. And with some of my Israeli friends, I'm like, what about this word? And what about that word? And it's quite interesting that one of my friends was telling me about the word Baal, that Baal just means to be a farmer, or it's a farm, because it's fertility. It's about, the god of rain and all this sort of stuff. And so Baal was worshipped. I mean, you can worship anything. Usually it's an object like a rock or a statue or a tree or something. And so obviously Baal was worshipped. That's quite interesting. So I've only got the begot issue there in the commentary, and I don't really have much written here. I've got the 1546 of Stephanus, but it doesn't look like there's any real issues there. I've got Scrivener's text there, and the rest of it sort of needs to be filled in. Let's just check the King James out here. And Aram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Naasson, and Naasson begat Salmon. Okay. So there's not much there. Lots of work to be done. Okay. But that's good for us because we're zipping through this quite quickly. So 1.5. Salmon the Egeneseton Boaz ek tes Rechab Boaz the Egeneseton Obed ek tes Ruth Obed the Egeneseton Yesi. The 1900 King James Pure Cambridge edition has, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. And 2016 edition has, and Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz begot Obed by Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. Okay, so there is some difference here. So let's see if I've got an interlinear. Some of these I have, and some I haven't. Okay, so I've got an interlinear. So Salmon's the same, and begat, begot. It's different. Boaz. And then it's spelled booze there. I'm not sure about that. That's interesting. I'll just quickly check if there is a picture here. Yeah, booze. Booze. Okay. And oh no, that is wrong. So that's a mistake. Sorry about that. That in the 1611 should say booze. So I'm glad I checked that. I'll have to double check through that, and also there as well. But yeah, all the other names, Rahab, Obed, they're fine. So it's only got Boaz where it looks like Boaz, but yeah, that's definitely wrong. So I'll have to fix that. Here we go. Very few manuscripts have Boaz. So P1, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, K, and CO. Booze, C, D in Luke 33 PCG1, which aligns with the LXX, and almost 1,500 manuscripts suggests booze to be original by far. So obviously they're talking about the reading of the Greek. So the TR reading is what people are going for, not BOES. But I guess it's just phonetic. It wouldn't, if you were translating it, it wouldn't make that much difference. Now, see, the thing is, the King James translators are very faithful. they would have names in the Hebrew and they would translate it accordingly. But then when they got to the New Testament, some of the names they translated, like say Noah as Noe, and it's like, well, that's different. Or Isaiah, Isaias, and sometimes you're like, who is that? But they're just being very faithful to the Greek and to the Hebrew. Now, sometimes, like say Jesus, they'll have Jesus, but sometimes it's talking about Joshua. So there are places in the Bible where, because it's exactly the same name. So sometimes in the King James, it actually has Jesus written there. And so people, sometimes when that's changed to Joshua, people are up in arms saying, oh, they've taken Jesus out of the Bible and all this. And I'm like, not really. They've just matched it up to who we would historically know as Joshua. And sometimes even the marginal note would say Joshua, just so people would know that. But they had a certain standard how they were translating names, so they stuck with it. Okay, so we've got the 1550 there. Theodore Beza's text, hardly anything written. How embarrassing. Got a bunch of critical text ones. So they do actually change that. So that's quite interesting. So that would be a difference. Booze or Boaz. So that's interesting. So that's something we'd have to look at. Booze in Anglo-Saxon edition. And I've hardly got any English there. So maybe I can just go to... We already sort of looked at those. So where are we? We're in number 5. So we've skipped a few. But let's see. I've got Boaz. This is booze. And that's booze with an S. That's probably where I got unstuck, because I was thinking there is a change, but it's actually, they're both wrong. So 1900 has an S there. Now the 1611 has an S, but does it? So this is where it's, okay, here we go. Yeah, it does, where I put a Z there. Very interesting. Okay, so it can, like, even just having that information there, it's good to just double check everything. And that's why I've got the pictures on my site, because to look that, the King James edition up, there's 2 or 3 minutes of looking that up where I've taken, an extra few minutes so that I don't have to do that each time, because all of these, and obviously when there's a page with hardly any information on it, it's going to have a few errors here and there. When there's a ton of information, usually I'm going through it over and over and over. So that's why sometimes people are like, oh, how do you know so much about a certain verse? It's like, well, when you're actually building a website like this, sometimes you're proofreading over and over and over, like dozens and dozens of times. So it just becomes internalized. So people say, oh, what about this? And it just spews forth. It's like anything, the more you focus on something, the better you get at it. Let's go down here. There's really not much in the language department. Commentaries, not much happening. So I'll just get rid of that papyri and that one. So we were going through this, weren't we? Boaz, booze, boos. Interesting. Different ways of spelling. And then we got Boaz and Greens, booze, Boaz, booze, boos, booze, boos, 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 booze, booze. Interesting. But yeah, most of the TR ones had the booze there. Okay. So verse 6. So this is our last verse. Now, I know that there is some textual issue here, and so there will probably be a fair bit more written about stuff here. So that's probably good to finish on. Helgi said, interesting, in Norwegian Bibles, begat has traditionally been rendered as fick, got, received, which is in line with the etymology of the English word. Okay, interesting. Yeah, got, begot, fick. Very interesting. So here we have Yese the Egenesin ton David ton Basilia. David the ho Basilius Agenese ton Salamonta ek tais ton tu Uriu. So the 1900 King James has, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias. And the 2016 edition has, and Jesse begot David the king, and David the king begot Solomon of her who had been the wife of Uriah. Now, when I was doing the 2016 edition, I felt, and I still do feel, that the modern King James editions has too many italics compared to the 1611. 1611 had hardly any italics, really. It was when Blaney did his revision that he put a whole bunch of more italics in there than I think were needed. Say, for example, in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, where it has the love of God. Now, of God is in italics, but it's clearly in Beza's text, it's in Scrivener's text, it's in the TR. So why has he put that in italics? It's his prerogative, but and even the New King James, most of the time they just deleted italics. So they didn't even check the Greek there. They just don't have of God. So that's where they depart from the TR. But this here, I started to go through and copy. I got rid of all the italics, and then I only put the ones there that were in the 1611. But unfortunately, I didn't realize sometimes they used them for emphasis. So when it has Hosanna to the Son of David, the Hosanna is in italic, but it's in the Greek, it's in everything. And I was like, this is for emphasis, but it wasn't for emphasis anywhere else where it said Hosanna. So I was like, okay, I've got to be careful doing this. So what I did is I thought I'll just default back to the 1900. And where I know there are differences, I will, like love of God in 1 John 3:16. I won't have those italics there. I didn't put, say, in 1 John 2:23, where it has he that acknowledges the Son, or the Father has a Son also, or the Son and the Father also, whichever way it goes. But that was all in italics in the 1611, and so I didn't put those in italics either. And there are some places like this place I know, but it's like I've just got to make the 2016 solidified, matched with the 1900. Then from there, it's like, okay, let's get it closer to the 1611 as much as possible, and let's get rid of some of these italics. And so that will probably happen in later revisions, I guess, and a revision will be getting closer to the King James of 1611, but obviously without having things like Hosanna italicized where it's emphasis. It just made it hard because I went through nearly the whole Bible and did that. It took so long, and then I was just like, forget it. Let's just go with the italics that are in the King James at the moment. So we can see the differences here. Very similar. You have David. It's just a spelling issue. Begot, begat. So in the original 1611, the only italic was that had been, where in the 1900 or after Blaney had been the wife was all in italics. So her, the wife, is basically the definite article has that in it. So I guess I'll speak about that here. Italics. 3 extra italics appear here in Matthew 1:6 when comparing the 1611 to the post-1769 King James Version editions. And Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias. Whereas the original 1611, in the original 1611, it has only italics on that had been, not including the wife. The KJV of 1611 had much less italics than later King James Version editions. There are very good reasons for the inclusion of italics, and many times they make the verse much more understandable. The wife of Uriah was Bathsheba, who David committed adultery with. David also had Uriah killed in battle, so to cover up the illegitimate pregnancy, Uriah was a Hittite. So I just mentioned a few things because it's quite interesting. If you go through in modern day Israel, oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, you know, these people are like the Canaanites. We're just pushing them out of the land and all this stuff. And sometimes I point out, well, even God was displeased with David killing a Hittite. Uriah was a Hittite. And he was living peaceably with them. And God was very displeased that this had happened. And so, it's quite an interesting study to do. So, so with the italics, I would say that in future editions of the 2016, probably, when I bring that out with Proverbs and Psalms, which are nearly done, I'll probably go, well, I really have to do a wholesale examination of every place's italics and to fix them up. And so, but really that really needs to be done in just the King James editions. Will Kinney admits that as well. We're all sort of looking at some places and it's like, why does it have italics there? And it's not needed, it's not necessary. And so, but it has the words. And that's why sometimes people are going, oh, I don't look at the italics because that's not in the Greek. And oftentimes it's like, well, no, it has to be there or else you can't have a sentence, And sometimes too, it's mistakenly like the wife of Uriah. People would think, oh, that's not in there, but it is. It's in the 1611. Okay, so Daud Veho Basilius, also David the King, and David the King. So this is in those manuscripts there. David there, or also David, and David. Papyrus 1, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, GF1, or Family 1, Family 13, etc. And so the hot Basilius, the king, David the King, is omitted in some manuscripts. So that's just another issue there. So that would be textual criticism. Begat, begot. We've already read that in the other ones. David the King. The Textus Receptus includes the words hot Basilius the King, while the critical text omits these words in the second mention of them. A format is found in Matthew 1:17 that supports the Textus Receptus reading here. So this is where internal evidence makes a difference. The 14 significant generations are selected. We first read from Abraham to David of 14 generations. Then part of the last clause is repeated with respect to the name David. Since that is all that is first said in the preceding clause, that is from David until the carrying away into Babylon of 14 generations. And then information from the last clause is repeated again at the start of the next clause, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ of 14 generations. Since the word Jesse begat David the King, Matthew 1:6, came at the end of one of those 14 prominent generation markers, stylistic comparative analysis with Matthew 1:11 and 1:17 would lead us to expect that the next clause would repeat this information, which indeed it does in the TR, saying, and David the king begat Solomon, but this is omitted by the critical text. So what he's saying here is, I'll get this in like chapter format. So what he's saying here is, it says, so all the generations from David, for Abraham to David are 14 generations. Okay, so we know it says that to David, and then from David is mentioned again until the carrying away into Babylon of 14 generations. Okay, and then repeated again, the people from Babylon, or the carrying away into Babylon, the carrying away into Babylon to Christ of 14 generations. So Abraham, David, carrying away into Babylon, Christ. Okay, so we see David repeated and Babylon repeated. So when we go to the actual verse, we see just as much as the carrying away into Babylon is repeated here, about the time they were carried away into Babylon. Then it says, and after they were brought to Babylon, or carried away into Babylon. So it's repeated. So we would expect the same type of pattern here. And Jesse beget David the king, and David the king beget Solomon of her who had been the wife of Uriah. So because that's the end of the 14 there, and so Solomon is part of the next one. So we have David the king, and then we have it repeated again, David the king. So that would make sense, because that is an important juncture where when we see carried away to Babylon, and it says after they were brought to Babylon or carried away to Babylon, so it's the same thing. And so that's good internal evidence for the reading of David the king, to have that repeated, because this part here, David the king, is the finish. And then it says, okay, and let's start the next 14, and David the king. So it says it again. But in the critical text, David the king is deleted there. So it just says, Jesse begat David, and David the king begat Solomon. So it there is internal evidence for that, but there's also a lot of manuscript evidence for that. So we might look at that a little bit further in up and coming shows. So what have I got here? The 1546 of Stephanus. We've got the 1550 here. So they have Hobasilius. So this would probably be a place where I need to come up to speed a little bit more with the information that I got on my website, going through this issue, because there is a textual issue here. Yesada Egenison ton David ton Basilia. So that ton Basilia is deleted, but clearly here in the Textus Receptus 1598 it has it. Scrivener, he's got it there. See, this is how his original text looked. They have Hot Basilius with the number 1 there. So this is where the Westcott and Hort text, it would, if you read down the bottom of the page, it would say omitted or omit. Number 1, omit. So that's because he formulated this TR from Beezus and looked at a few others. But then he was clearly showing where it departed in the Westcott and Hort text. So PFS Warehouse says hello PFS Warehouse. Interesting comment about the authenticity of the king in 1:6 makes much sense. Yeah, and so I think I got that from Gavin Mcgrath. He might be an interesting one to look at, actually. He's got quite a lot written about all this. So yeah, not much information there. Tischendorf, he has this, but he actually has Tom Basilia. Actually, I'm looking at the wrong Tom Basilia. Here, it's the second time it appears. That's where it's been deleted. Okay, so we have, David the King here. That's pretty weird that I've got that there in the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure why I've done that. Let's look at the King James. It has and Jesse, and so this is, there's no marginal notes as yet or corrections or anything like that. It just has scriptures, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. So you can see the wife is not in italics in 1611. That's very interesting. Okay, so we go down, not much put in there. Language, Bibles, hardly anything. And that is about it for that. So I'm going to quickly go to Gavin Mcgrath's material. Okay, so Gavin Mcgrath's books. Let's have a look. So, who's Gavin Mcgrath? You need to know who this guy is. He's an Aussie. He's an Australian guy. Now, his commentary on the received text is really good. I don't agree with everything, but he's done a lot of homework. So let's look at Matthew 1:9, and then we'll look at the ratings of the TR. So he's got in the preface volume Matthew 1 to 14. So this is an introduction where he talks about a whole bunch of stuff, a dedication. So he's an Anglican guy, and then he goes through the commentary on the text, and then he's got like ratings of the TR variants. So anyone who wants to know about the TR, where there's variants, all the rest of it, they really need to know this material. And so this is freely available online. He's up to Mark 4 and 5. So he's obviously working on 6 and 7, etc. So volume 7 is coming soon. So he's constantly working through this material. And so you can see, he's Sydney University with the Byzantine text lectionaries, 1968 and 1544. So he's going through a lot of this stuff. Sometimes I get bombarded by critical text people. They're like, do you know any scholars in the field? I'm like, plenty. And I remember Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry were like, you don't know anyone. And so I just pointed to Gavin Mcgrath, and they just went silent because he'd already looked at a whole bunch of stuff that they were looking at about the purple codices. And I'm pretty sure even Elijah Hixson probably utilized some of what he said because he had gone through and written a commentary on Matthew and first few chapters of Mark on it. So he goes through the title of Matthew, so we won't go through that. We'll just go to. So this is one of the places where he talks about the closed class of 3 witnesses. So sometimes you might hear me saying that. The closed class of 3 witnesses is the Greek, the Latin, and the early church writers. So when you go outside of that, you're going to, the Bohairic, the Ethiopic, and other things. So, okay, so here we have Matthew 1:6. So I'm pretty sure. Okay, so I can read it down to there. So that will help us. 1:6, the king, the second occurrence after David. Okay, so he makes that quite clear. I should make that more clear on my website. The second occurrence of the TR's Greek words, and by the way, he is a TR defender. He defends the Textus Receptus and shows why we should have the TR, and he also has like an appendix, where he shows why the probability of having the TR in these places is high. And so he goes through and shows you the reading. So he, Matthew 1:6, Scrivener reads Solomontos, not Solomona. And he shows you the differences between even Scrivener and like the majority text. And so he's looking at a whole bunch of stuff. So like I said, sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't, but he does defend the TR. The second occurrence of the TR's Greek words, ho, the Basilius king, in the words David the king begat Solomon, etc., are supported by the majority Byzantine text, that is W032, 5th century, which is Byzantine in Matthew 1 to 28, Luke 8 to 13 to 24, and 13 to 24:53, Sigma 042. So I won't read through all that. It's not really going to help you that much by me going through that. So it is further supported by Latin, Rex King, by Jerome's Latin Vulgate 5th century, and old Latin versions, a 4th century, etc. From the Latin support for this reading, it is manifested in the Clementine Vulgate of 1592. However, the king is omitted in old Latin versions K, 4th and 5th centuries, G1, 8th, 9th century, and G2, 10th century. There is no good textual argument against the representative Byzantine reading, which is therefore the correct reading. Stylistically, this genealogy repeats information from the preceding clause at the end of the 14 generations marker, but not elsewhere. Thus, on one hand, since Solomon of her had been the wife of Urias, Matthew 1:6, is not at a 14 generation marker, this clause is not repeated, but we simply read, and Solomon begat Rehoboam, Matthew 1:7. But on the other hand, when we go to the 14 generations markers, we find information from the last clause is carried over to the next clause. Thus, we first read at the end of the second 14 generations, and Josiah begat Jeconiah and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon, Matthew 1:8, and then some of this information is repeated in the next verse. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begat Salathiel, etc., in Matthew 1:12. So this is very similar to what I have on my website. Obviously, I've gotten inspired by this and written my own thing on it. The same format is found in Matthew 1:17. And so in Gavin Mcgrath said I could copy and paste anything that he's written as long as I give him the credit. So I guess I'm giving him the credit now. That's what he said after I put that. That was early stuff into my website. I was just copying and pasting from anywhere. But I think I just worded it different. This same format is in Matthew 1:17, where the 14 significant generations here selected. We first read from Abraham to David of 14 generations, then part of the last clause is repeated with respect to the name David, since that is all that is first said in the preceding clause, that is, from David until the carrying away into Babylon of 14 generations. And then information from the last clause is repeated again at the start of the next clause, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ of 14 generations. Since the words Jesse begat David the king, Matthew 1:6, come at the end of one of those 14 prominent generation markers, stylistic comparative analysis with Matthew 1:11 and 17 would lead us to expect that the next clause would repeat this information, which it indeed does, saying, and David the king begat Solomon, etc. The reason for the omission is necessarily in the realm of speculation, Was this an accidental loss due to paper fade, loss of Hot Basilius the king, in which the passage will still made prima facie sense without these words, and no subsequent scribe took the break to simply be a stylistic space gap? Or was this omission a deliberate stylistic improvement? If so, the scribe responsible does not appear to have understood the distinction made in the genealogy with the repetition of the longer information of the last clause in the next clause only at the 14 generation markers. Thus, noting this style is not used for Solomon in the last part immediately after David, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias, and Solomon begat Rehoboam, Matthew 1, 6 and 7. Did the copyists seek to assimilate the style of not repeating the longer information used for Solomon from the previous clause evident in Solomon begat Rehoboam, by likewise omitting the words the king in their second occurrence after David? If so, the scribe's improvement left behind it the fatal evidence of its removal through the incongruity it creates in stylistic analysis of Matthew 1, 6, 7, 11, 12, and 17. The TR's reading has clear support from the three witnesses, that is, the Byzantine Greek, the Latin, and an ancient church Latin writer, Jerome, who died in 420 via the Vulgate. Since the reading of the king after David, the second time in Matthew 1:6 is supported by the representative Byzantine text, and there is no good textual argument against it, it is correct. Taking into account its support in these three witnesses, together with the textual analysis supra, the reading of the TR and the authorized version is sure with a high level of certainty. On the system of rating textual readings, A to E, I would give the second occurrence of reading the king after David in Matthew 1:6 an A. That is, the text of the TR is the correct reading and has a high level of certainty. Textual history outside the closed class of witnesses. Outside the closed class of sources, the correct reading of Matthew 1:6, the king after David, the second time in Matthew 1:6, was preserved by the mixed type text, Codex C04, Codex Paris Ephremi Rescriptus, 5th century, the Syriac Haklayan version 616, and Coptic version Dilman 18th and 19th centuries. But the incorrect reading omitting the king is found in the two leading Alexandrian texts, Rome Vaticanus, Codex B03, 4th century, the London Sinaiticus, Codex Aleph 01, 4th century, as well as two manuscript traditions of the Syriac versions, Vetus Syria, 3rd, 4th century, Cyrus Sinaiticus and Cyrus Curetonianus, all Egyptian Coptic versions beginning in the 3rd century, and the Armenian version 5th century. These words have also been omitted in the NU text et al. And since they are not found in the NASB, RSV, New Revised Standard Version, English Standard Version, or NIV, so too the American Standard Version reads simply, and David begot Solomon. Okay, so that's a pretty good refutation of the critical text reading, but also a great defense of the Byzantine text, the TR, and from an Australian scholar. So following truth, LJ, evening all. How you going, LJ? So I think I'm maybe I'll just go to the last one. Well, all he's got here is Matthew 1:6. Scrivener reads Solomontos and not Solomona. They both translate as Solomon. As seen by the following itemized instances, Scrivener's text is not, as it claims, the TR, although in general it is very close to the TR. Okay, so he's got an interesting take on the TR. Now we want to know more about 1.6. So I'll see if there's any more. Okay, so he does talk about it quite a bit. At Matthew 1.6 once and at Matthew 12.42 twice, the spelling Solomontos, Solomon, found in Scrivener's text is a minority Byzantine reading. That's quite interesting. So I wonder if that is Beza's reading though. So let's have a quick look. I'll just throw that over here for a second. We've got Solomunta. And so he's saying Solomontos is Scrivener's. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so we've got Solomonta there. And Solomonta is the same. Solomonta. Okay, so this is where I would disagree with Gavin here. So he's saying the Scrivener text isn't directly represented by the majority Byzantine, but obviously this is the Byzantine text that was used by the reformers. So anyway, this is quite interesting. So let's read through this. I'll make this a little bit larger for you guys because it must be hard to read all that. Okay, let's get it nice and big. There we go. Cancel that. Is a minority Byzantine reading. For example, Matthew 1.6, W36 Sigma, and he's got all those things written. It is earlier found at Matthew 1.6 in Stephanus's 1550, and at Matthew 12.42 in Erasmus's 1522, and Stephanus's 1550. Okay, so that's interesting. Another minority Byzantine spelling at Matthew 1.6 is Solomona, lectionary 2378, but the majority Byzantine text spelling at Matthew 1.6, that is lectionary 1968, is Solomon, and the majority Byzantine text spelling at Matthew 12.42 twice, for example, W, those ones, Sigma, is Solomonos. Both of these majority Byzantine text spelling enjoy the residual support of von Soden's K group at Matthew 1.6, Solomona once, and Matthew 12.42, Solomonos twice, and must therefore be supported by at least 90% of Byzantine manuscripts, and Green's textual apparatus based on this data says at least 95% of manuscripts, although as elsewhere, Pierpont here fails to factor in a sufficiently high error bar from von Soden's generalist groups. The majority Byzantine text spellings are found at Matthew 1.6 in Erasmus 1516, 1522, and at Matthew 12.42 and Erasmus 1516. The majority Byzantine text readings have no good textual argument against them and are thus correct. The majority Byzantine text reading at Matthew 12.42 is found in 4 out of 5 references by Origen, and the majority Byzantine text reading is found in the remaining 1 Matthew 12.42 reference. Thus, Origen was probably the originator of this spelling variant at Matthew 12:42. The majority Byzantine text spelling at Matthew 1:6 is found in 6 of the 8 selections of Elzevir's textual apparatus. 1624, Gospel Manuscripts, Trinity College, Cambridge, BX17, V, Cambridge University, and so it's got a whole bunch of things written there, which I won't read. Although Elzevir, 1633, allows the minority Byzantine spelling of Solomontos, Solomon, at Matthew 1:6, the majority Byzantine text at Matthew 12:42 is found in 4 of the 8 selections of Elzevir's textual apparatus, 1624, Gospel Manuscripts versus Cambridge University, and then there's a whole lot written there, technical jargon, whereas the minority reading is found in only 1 of them, Gospel Manuscript 1, Trinity College, Cambridge. So Erasmus appears to have developed Solomon, as a textual trademark for Matthew 12:42 between the time of his 1516 and 1522 edition. Later, this bright idea was further developed as Solomon was adopted as a textual trademark for Matthew 1:6, evident in, for example, Stephanus 1550 and Elzevir's 1633. The MBT readings are found thrice at Matthew 1:6, Solomona, and 12:42 in Solomonos. In the majority text of Burgon and Miller, 1899, Hodges and Farstead, 1985, and Robertson and Pierpont, 2005. At Matthew 1:6 and Matthew 12:42, the Burgonites, Hodges and Farstead, consider these majority text spellings should replace the spellings found in, for example, Scrivener's text, when they claim are the spellings of the TR or Textus Receptus. But because there is no difference in English translation, in fact, we cannot say for sure what the TR used by the Authorized Version translators was in these 3 instances. Thus, Burgon and Miller were wiser in both Matthew 1:6 and Matthew 12:42 there to simply state their preference for the majority Byzantine text reading, but not to state what they think the TR reads here. But whatever it was, these majority texts have here discovered the true TR, found at Matthew 1:6 once and 12:42 twice. The earlier Greek New Testament text of Erasmus, let the text of Scrivener be amended accordingly. Okay, so that's quite interesting. So basically what he's saying is this would be, because, I've always said there's about 20 departures from the text of Theodore Beza's 1598 to the King James that are translatable. Okay, so this is a non-translatable issue, but this has to do with the text underlying the Authorized Version. Did the Authorized Version guys go, okay, well, let's go with Beza here, because they did in places divert from Beza. Did they go with Erasmus or Stephanus, or who did they go with? And so he's making a case that they didn't go with Beza here, and that the majority Byzantine text is very strong here. And so and sometimes majority text guys, he calls them the Burgonites, because he's rightfully pointing out that that's where the majority text movement had its puppy feet in Dean John William Burgon and Scrivener and Hoskia and Miller, that these guys basically started the majority text movement, which sort of came to its zenith. It came to its height in the late 70s, early 80s, and with Jay Green and Hodges and Farstead and others. So, yeah, he's making an interesting case there. There's no translatable difference between this, but he's just saying if we want to be accurate to the received text, we should really have the Solomon, I think it's Solomon Ta or Solomon Tos. I can't remember which one he's actually advocating for, but this is like, really splitting hairs, but it's good. This is the sort of thing that I do, go through and just split hairs over these type of issues, and that's fine. That's his prerogative to do that. He's a well-educated guy, and so let's just see if there is. Oops, I don't need to open that. Let's just see if there's anything else that he talks about with Matthew 1:6. 1:6. Okay. So he says here, furthermore, in manuscript Washington Codex Freerianus, David spelt David, etc. in Matthew 1:6 is sometimes abbreviated to DAD with a line across the top of these letters. At Matthew 12:23, the abbreviation DAD is also found with a bar over the last two letters, etc. In Matthew 1, in verse 1, in verse 6, lectionary 2378, 11th century, and then he talks about that. So that's another issue to do with Matthew 1:6. A scribe later seeking to spell out this greater detail might spell it as David or Dawid. This technique of one scribe using abbreviations for proper names, followed by a later scribe making a decision to spell the name out in full, has a modern sequel in that we do not know from von Soden what the majority Byzantine text is here. And so the exercise of a stylistic discretion at this point accounts not only for the variance in the spelling of David in Hodges and Farstead as David, the spelling also found in Scrivener, as opposed to Burgon and Miller or Pierpont Robinson's David, but also for at least some of the other variants in the spellings with other names. Okay, so let's see where else he's mentioning this. Is that the same thing we were looking at? Okay. Matthew 1, letters are also sometimes changed with the spellings of names. David 6 times, and then he has Solomonta. In Scrivener is Solomona, Solomon, etc. Talks about they shall call. Okay, so let's just see if there's any other ones in Matthew 1:6. The Gospel according to Matthew, stylized within reasonable guidelines by adding saint before Matthew. Okay, so what's he showing here? Appendix 4 scriptures, rating the TR's textual readings A to E. Okay, so he's got all these A readings and he's got a C reading there, which is just quite interesting. So I don't think there's once where he actually has an E. An E is like it needs to be changed. And so this is the sort of thing which, he would be, someone like James Snap, should really read through all this material. Okay, so let's go through this again. But not counted in 53 readings like Matthew 1:6, Hodges and Farstead, TR. Okay, so that's where Scrivener's text does not represent the properly composed received text. Okay, but that's a bit of an accusation against Beza, so that's pretty heavy, but that's Okay, so here we have Matthew 1:6. So yeah, that's the one we read through. So I think the rest of Matthew 1:6 issues appear there. Okay. Yeah, and that's it. So, but that was a good way of finishing that, I think, by going through the textual commentary on the received text. So we'll continue our study of Matthew 1, verses 2 to 6. Now, if there's anything that I feel like I really need to go back over, I will. I might go through what Burgon says in some of these verses, because he did a commentary also, and he actually wrote about his where he thinks things need changing in his text. Well, Miller actually published that. So we might look at that as well, and I might just go through some commentary about this. And so obviously I haven't put the commentary into my website, but that doesn't stop us from studying that type of thing. So I might just go to Study Light or something like that, and we might read through and see if there's anything interesting for us to go through in this. So thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you another day. So we've got Docky says, hey, Tesla Chaplain, PFS Warehouse, and Following Truth, LJ. Okay, guys, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.